Everybody, I'm Erin Tannenbaum. I'm the Senior Managing Director of the Southern California Leadership Network, and welcome to Rest and Renewal for Leaders in the Midst of Turbulent Times. No doubt today is going to be incredibly not only informative, but is going to provide us with some tools that we can take away, and of course couldn't be more relevant to current times. So before we start, just welcome to Zoom. If you're not speaking, please make sure to go ahead and just, select mute for your window. We'd love to see your faces. So please turn on your video if you are okay with that, but we understand that there's a lot going on in the background in our worlds these days. So if you can't turn your video on, that's obviously not a problem. There will be time for Q&A, so please feel free to use the chat or the raise your hand function, and our SCLN team will be on the lookout, making sure that hopefully we can get to all of your questions. And we are going to do some small group work today. So if you can, just make note of the breakout room number that you're in, just in case your Wi-Fi goes out or something happens. Once you join again, we can go ahead and put you right back into that room. So just a little bit about us, the Southern California Leadership Network, or SCLN. We are a civic leadership organization. We were founded in 1987, so we have more than 30 years of experience delivering civic and professional leadership programs. Our mission is to advance the region and state by inspiring, preparing, and connecting leaders to drive change. And my colleague Jessica is going to go ahead and share with you in just a bit of how we do that. But basically, we prepare professionals across industries and sectors and actually geographies with the knowledge and leadership skills and the network to become collaborative, compassionate leaders, both in your professional and in your civic careers. A lot of people don't know this about us, but we are a 501c3 organization. We have our own board of directors. Obviously, we raise our own funds. And we are an affiliate of the Los Angeles Area Chamber of Commerce. So how do we do all of this? I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Jessica Coronel, who's the Manager of Recruitment and Administration for SCLN.
Thank you, Erin, and thank you everyone for joining us today. As Erin shared, I am the Manager of Recruitment and Administration here at SCLN. I oversee the recruitment for all three of our leadership programs throughout the year. So everything from when a candidate is interested in submitting application to learning more, all the way through our process of interviewing, talking to the fellow or the prospective fellow, all the way to sending out acceptance packages. So if you have any questions, I'll be on throughout the rest of the conversations today. So you could send me the personal chat, or you could find me in my email that's listed here. So, Erin. So briefly, as a reminder to some of maybe our alumni who have joined us today, or even if you're new, we do have 3 leadership programs that we run throughout the year. Our 3 leadership programs are Leadership Ballet, which is our regional LA County focused program. I have some notes here prepared, but we cover a variety of different issues affecting LA County, the history and interconnected issues in itself. And we also do a 360 leadership assessment that goes long throughout the program. Additionally, we have our Leadership Southern California program, which is our regional program where we cover, the range from LA County to Orange County, Ventura County, Riverside County, and San Bernardino. What are the issues, what are the trends happening within each county, how everything's interconnected. And there's also a 360 assessment attached to it, along with other learning and coaching opportunities in that program. We're currently recruiting for it, and the deadline for that is actually April 23rd. And then finally, our Reardon Leadership Institute program, RLI for short. We just launched the application a couple of weeks ago, and the early application deadline for that is May 14th. But that program is for people interested in nonprofit board service. So if you're interested in maybe joining a nonprofit board, or maybe want to take that step in the near future, this is a great program. All of our programs are 8 to 9 months. So you go through everything in a shared classroom setting. This year, hopefully by September, all of our programs will be going back to in-person learning, but as currently, we are virtual, but if you have any questions about the programs, feel free to reach out to me. And once you go through our program, so Ari, you join our extended alumni family. We have over 3,400 alumni across the country, so not only locally, but across country. We invite our alumni as guest speakers to our seminars, interviews, through our recruitment process. And when we are in-person excursion hosts, we do networking events similarly to this one. We have our welcome mixers and our graduations that are open to our alumni, continued education opportunities, and civic engagement opportunities, also through our marketing tools that a lovely colleague, Lindsay, spearheads. But like I said, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to myself or any of my colleagues who are on the call today. But without further ado, I'd like to pass the baton on to the star of the show for today, Dr. Stanley Ward, and I will briefly read his bio here. Dr. Stanley Ward is a certified 360 feedback facilitator through the Center for Creative Leadership and certified change management practitioner through Proxy. In 2014, he founded Influence Coaching LLC, which can be found at coachingforinfluence.com, to provide individual and small group coaching resources that help leaders maximize their strengths, correct their liabilities, and make peace with their weaknesses, all while developing others in their organizations. Dr. Ward holds a PhD in leadership studies, thinks fountain pens are cool, and jams out to the ukulele with his family. So without further ado, Dr. Stanley Ward, take it away.
Thank you, Jessica. I appreciate that. And yes, I do actually have recordings available of me singing U2 songs with my daughters. So feel free and email me if that's something that you would like to hear. I think as we're getting into this conversation about burnout, as we were talking before the seminar went live, we were just talking about sort of this, again, the collective strain that we've been under for the last year. So although I didn't originally plan to start this way, I think it would be a really good time for all of us to take a collective breath. So let's do this. I'm going to ask that wherever you're sitting to watch this, if you would, just sit up tall so your chest can open up, those lungs can be open. I'm going to ask that you put your hands in your lap, and we are going to take just 3 gentle, relaxing breaths. The way we'll do that is inhale through our nose for a count of 3, and then exhale for a count of 4. So let's start with an inhale. Exhale. Inhale. Exhale. Inhale. And exhale. All right. Thank you for doing that with me. Yeah, the topic for today is rest and renewal for very possibly weary leaders in the midst of turbulent times. And we want to start off with some statistics. Recently, I've been doing some reading on where we are at with burnout and where we're seeing it. Of course, our first line responders, a lot of our helping professions right now are experiencing a lot of this. Physicians, I've been working with physicians to address burnout issues. Part of what makes this conversation so interesting to me right now is that in 2019, Gallup did some research that came out at the beginning of 2020. So all this was just before the pandemic. And notice that from Gallup's research, pre-pandemic in 2019, 28% of workers, so professionals employed in a workplace setting, said that they were experiencing signs of burnout very often. And 76% of those surveyed, again, professionals in the workplace, not any one particular industry, said that at least sometimes they were experiencing symptoms of burnout. So that's so interesting to me because burnout, in other words, was already an issue and a growing concern pre-pandemic. And as I've reviewed statistics and some interviews about what's happening since the pandemic has started, we are seeing significant increases in different industries regarding the rates of burnout that are being reported. And of course, again, that's just those rates that are being reported. As professionals, sometimes there is a stigma that goes with burnout. And so folks are reluctant to admit where they're at and how they may be struggling with it. My hope for you today who are participating in our webinar is that by the end of our time together, you will be able to clearly distinguish burnout versus worn out. There is a real difference, and the way you respond will be different. Also, my hope is that you will recognize where you are on the burnout spectrum. One of the things we know from the research on burnout is it's not a switch that's off or on, but rather you might think of like a 10-point scale, a spectrum, where we are all on that spectrum in some place. We are all certainly experiencing pressure, various kinds of stresses. The question is, when we think about where we're at on that spectrum, are we at a place where we're able to function the way we need to, or is there a cost in our leadership to where we're at? And then finally, we'll leave our time together with some easy wins, some things that I've found working with clients that have helped them make quick progress on burnout. And my hope would be then that with those quick wins, you'll begin to free up some margin so that you can then do some of the longer work and the deeper work so you can show up as the leader that the world needs you to be. I would like to take a moment and pause though, because I see this as a partnership. This is not just me being a talking head. I would love to hear through the chat. So maybe I shouldn't say hear, maybe read. What would you like to learn today about burnout? What are some of your questions or concerns, things that you would like to get out of today's webinar? To the extent possible, I will do my best to make sure and weave those points in. So I have my journal, I have my pen, and as you're typing, I'll ask Lindsay to read some of those responses so I can be sure and note them.
We have the difference between burnout and worn out, how to revitalize when every day is nonstop Zoom meetings from 7 a.m. all the way through lunch, effective ways to reduce burnout, practices to combat burnout, how to heal and bounce back from burnout, difference between job burnout and career burnout. Will magically burnout go away when I get back to my regular office?
No. That's easy. Done. Check that one.
Again, yeah, key tactics to take back to my organization to implement in the short term, more about having to lead their team through burnout, how to prevent burnout in the first place. Oh, this one's in how grief contributes to burnout, how to support myself and those who look to me for support. And another one, how to deal with burnout related to the news and everything going on in the world. And then practical tips that can be intergenerational in this virtual working and living space. I think that's all of them.
That's really good. Thank you for that. We will be able to speak to a lot of this. So that's good. And to this, really, a lot of this starts with awareness. And so that's one of the reasons we're having this webinar, is so that you can be more aware both of what burnout is, so that you can begin to recognize it when it's not quite such a threat, because again, we're all on that spectrum somewhere. And then also be aware of some fairly simple things that you can do on the front end to help you get some relief, as well as help others find relief. So first of all, I want to distinguish burnout versus worn out. And I want to do this with the metaphor of, think about a car engine. A car engine needs several things in order to work. Among them are both gasoline for fuel, or if you have an electric car, this engine doesn't work, or excuse me, the metaphor doesn't work quite as well. So we're going to use one of these older engines, but it needs gasoline and it needs oil to keep the engine running. You might think of being worn out as what happens when that car runs out of gasoline. Why? Because essentially the car runs out of gas and the engine just kind of sputters, but up, and it's done, it stops. And in order to get going again, what it needs is essentially to rest and refuel, right? So once we get the fuel that we need back into the automobile, we can go back down the road. Burnout is something different, and it's going to show up in a different way. And I'm thinking, before I get into that detail, the story of actually a university president I was visiting with when I was doing some of the research on burnout. I was visiting with him about some of the work I was doing, and he was reflecting on how he had gone on a 2-week vacation. And when he got back from that vacation, it was a beach vacation. He got back to the beach after 2 weeks. He was no more well rested than when he left. And he realized when he was no more well rested after 2 weeks off that there was something else going on for him. Okay. So he realized in that space, oh, I thought I was just worn out. Actually, it's something else. And that something else then could be burnout. Burnout, we know, is more like a motor when it runs out of oil. What's interesting about a car engine is that you can run it after it's emptied out of oil, because there's kind of residual oil. There's a little bit of stuff that's going to keep things flowing together so they can keep moving, and the various engine parts moving up against each other. And that'll work for a time. The problem is, as the engine is running without that oil to keep those parts moving cleanly against each other, as that engine is out of that, the longer you run the engine, the more damage you do to the engine until the engine finally breaks. And that's really what burnout is. Burnout is this space that we get into where, yeah, we're still functioning, but we're doing it in such a way that we're basically hurting ourselves. We're out of the resources we need in order to do the job, whether it's at work or at home. And so we're relying on these other things that are just kind of burning us up, burning us out in the process. So if you're worn out, rest, refuel, reset. If you're burned out, it's going to be a different process. So that brings me then to burnout's 3 dimensions. Again, think of burnout not as so much an off or on thing, but a much more complex phenomena. All 3 of these dimensions can be measured on different scales. The first is emotional exhaustion. Put simply, it's just a lack of energy. Often it shows up with things like just brain fog, that sense of just not being able to really focus or get clear, just chronic fatigue. It can show up in terms of when you get up day after day and the first thought is, man, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to make it through the day. That's telling you that you're really into that space of emotional exhaustion. And one of the things we know about it is kind of the number one predictor. It's a leading factor that can bring us to burnout because it can help cause some of these other issues. A second dimension is the fancy word from the research is depersonalization. I think of it in terms of being disconnected. You might think of it as being disconnected from people, disconnected from that sense of purpose or meaning. It can often show up with cynicism, or really feeling like you're just being a robot, just going through the motions. And a lot of times this can show up when we're emotionally exhausted. So it makes sense that these two can be tightly correlated, and that with exhaustion, depersonalization could begin to show up as well. The third factor, and it as far as causing burnout or predicting burnout, this is the one that has the least association, but it is a part of the burnout model, is this sense of ineffectiveness or a lack of accomplishment. I'm thinking of a friend of mine in law enforcement who is working to fight human trafficking where we live. And I asked him one time how it was going, and his reply was, Stan, I feel like I'm just throwing pebbles at a train trying to stop this problem. All right, so this friend was experiencing a sense of ineffectiveness, a lack of accomplishment with this bigger thing that he was fighting. So those are the three dimensions that go with burnout: emotional exhaustion, just being out of energy; depersonalization, a sense of disconnect, maybe cynicism; and a lack of accomplishment, that just growing sense of ineffectiveness. So with those three, I want to ask for discussion. How do you resonate with the car engine metaphor, and which do you feel more prone to, burnout or worn out? And because disconnect is such a threat to us with burnout, we're going to break you into the small groups in the discussion rooms and ask you to discuss these two questions. So how do you resonate with that car engine metaphor, and which do you feel more prone to, burnout or worn out?
And Stan, how long do they have?
10 minutes.
Okay.
I think a few more people are still wrapping up, but they're slowly coming in.
All right. I'm going to go back to sharing screen. Is that all right?
$20 seconds.
Those conversations, would love to see that in the chat.
Gabriella and I almost had all the problems resolved with burnout.
Well
Like
done.
2 more minutes and we would have had a thesis, right?
Well,
Gabriella, support me.
Yes, definitely.
Click share screen and just go then. That sounds great.
No, I think our conclusion was that COVID has actually been kind of a blessing for some people in the burnout scenario, because not having to commute and figuring out a way to work from home, and once you got past the jealous partner who doesn't appreciate that very much, we're good.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll get to that here in a little bit when we talk about calendar issues. Yeah, very good. Well, let's see. Let's just move that on forward. So again, what is burnout? So burnout happens when there is a mismatch between the resources we have and the demands of the situation, a prolonged mismatch. Thinking about, job burnout versus career burnout. Wait, that would be a interesting conversation to kind of dig into and understand some of the nuances of that. But yeah, certainly a person could be in the right career and they may find that the particular demands of the workplace they're in are such that they don't have the resources needed to meet those demands. One of the things that came up with some of these questions was basically, what can team leaders do? And one of the things we know, there's a couple things we look for. One of the things that is a strong predictor of burnout is micromanaging. And alongside that also is just a sense of where people feel like they have to deliver results where they don't have the resources to do it. And it expresses itself in different ways. Like we talked about, that emotional exhaustion. We could call that being out of gas. We could call the sense of depersonalization. We can call that being disconnected. And of course, that lack of accomplishment is about being ineffective. And let me back up just a minute. Whoops, let's see, let me back up. There we go. Regarding the out of gas experience, here are some things to look for. One of the things that was mentioned in the notes is this idea of what are some early signs. Of course, we're all going to have tired days, and especially when our brains are just under chronic stress. One of the things that we know is actually the functioning starts to drop off after time. And so that's one of the reasons that addressing this becomes so important. And as part of that functioning starting to drop off, that's where we can expect to look for some things like some just brain fog, that chronic fuzziness, that kind of thing. Again, part of that is being under this constant load without any letting up. So there's no chance to rest, to refresh, to refuel. And so that sense of burnout becomes inevitable. again, the cynicism, the sense of ineffectiveness. One of the reasons that burnout can be so tragic is this disconnect piece. So I used to teach in the humanities, and we would say that the difference between a comic story and a tragic story was not so much that a comic story was funny and a tragic story ended in isolation, but rather that comic stories end in community, tragic stories, or excuse me, not that comic stories are funny and tragic stories are sad. Comic stories end in community, tragic stories end in isolation. And so this disconnect, cynicism, the disconnect from purpose, disconnect from people, that really puts us on that path toward isolation and feeling very robot-like. And then again, when we don't have the resources we need, of course, we're going to feel ineffective. When we don't have the energy we need, of course, we're going to feel ineffective. And if we don't have a sense of purpose or meaning in what we're doing, we're going to feel ineffective. So all this stuff, these are 3 dimensions of one phenomena. All this stuff goes together. Once you become aware of the fact that, okay, I'm starting to feel ineffective and it's just going on and on and on, or with this disconnect, again, for some folks, and I'm this way, actually, I'm kind of introverted. So I like people, they just make me tired. So to not go into an office space for me is nice. It's refreshing. What I would need to watch for is, am I continuing to want to disconnect from people? Am I withdrawing more than usual? Things like that are things to watch for on the disconnect space. And on the ineffective space, I would encourage you, what are the stories that you're telling yourself as you evaluate your work? What language are you using to do that? Because that's going to tell you when you're starting to dip into some of these burnout symptoms. With that, let's talk about some quick wins. I'm going to skip past the biggest challenge just for the sake of time, because I do want to get to quick wins. The first is this, and this goes back to some of those questions about taking care of your team, or some of the intergenerational tips, things of that nature. For me, the concept of self-care, or that term self-care, I have struggled with it. For me, there is a sense that maybe I'm being selfish, that self-care could somehow feel that way, right? Why? Because I care deeply about both people and productivity, or care about results and relationships. That's how I'm measuring my sense of success and accomplishment. And so in order to do self-care, sometimes I've got to back away from that space, especially because I'm introverted. In order to get out of that sense of, oh gosh, I'm being selfish, which then has its own rumination loop that goes on. And by the way, one of the things that distinguishes distress, negative stress, from simple pressure or a positive stress that drives us to perform is rumination. So one of the ways I've been able to avoid that is to remind myself that I'm going to do these self-care practices not because I'm selfish. I'm going to do these self-care practices so that I can show up for my team, so that I can show up for my community, so that I can show up for my family. Again, think of the car engine. We have to do maintenance on that automobile engine. That automobile engine needs both fuel and it needs a lubricant, it needs oil in order for it to function. That's not selfish, that's just the way it is. So if you're wrestling with this sense of self-care and having a hard time to really embrace this idea that it's got to become a routine practice, just like routine maintenance for a car, I would encourage you, number one, change the mindset. Self-care is not selfish. The second thing I would look to that can be some very simple wins is this idea of sort of check your oil. You know, we talked about the oil earlier, right? Here are some ways that you can do that. First of all, check your calendar. Recently, I was working with a nonprofit leader, and she's doing some great things in her community. And as we were talking, she was talking about feeling disconnected. She was talking about feeling struggling with a sense of purpose and accomplishment, struggling especially with energy. And so we started to talk about her calendar, what her work life looked like. And she basically said when she opens her calendar for work, she just sees a series of meetings that drain her. Well, no wonder then there's that sense of ineffectiveness or a lack of energy or a sense of disconnect from the things that are really meaningful. Remember the story about the college president earlier. One of the things he was relating to me is that although, yeah, he took this 2-week vacation and didn't come back any more refreshed or rested, once he got back into the workplace, he started making time for a personal project that was really important to him for the university. It was really central to his core sense of mission and vision and what he really wanted to contribute to as a leader. And he said, ironically, working on that project was actually more refreshing and gave him more energy than a 2-week vacation. So I say all that to say, look at your calendar. And as you look at it, ask yourself, where are the things in my calendar that allow me to either rest and refresh, or where are the things in my calendar that reconnect me with that sense of purpose, that reconnect me with the people that energize me? Notice the next thing we want to check is check your connections, that connection to people, connection to purpose, so that you don't just feel like a robot. And also that ability to have self-efficacy, to make choices that have real significance. So any part of your calendar that you can actually control, that's in and of itself becomes a reinforcement, and it can be energizing. And again, it gives you opportunity to reconnect to your sense of real purpose and passion in the world. So let your calendar give you some feedback on where you're at with that. The third thing I would want to have you check is check your success metrics. Well, for perfectionists in particular, this is just brutal. Why? Because when they come away from their projects, rather than being able to look and say, oh, we accomplished X, Y, and Z, there's simply this running list in their head of all the things that didn't go the way they wanted it to, or that didn't meet some sense of an ideal. And what I see in the folks I've been working with lately is sort of this sense that if I'm not working on whether it's my business or I'm not working on my organization all the time, things are going to fall apart. Where does that come from? Well, it comes from this sense of success that says, if anything goes wrong, somehow I'm a bad leader or I'm a failed leader. The reality is, the reason organizations need leaders is because things go wrong. That's the space where leaders have the opportunity to then step up and demonstrate leadership. It's also one of the reasons that you'd want to look at your calendar. If there is no margin, even simply time between meetings on the calendar, we're talking about back-to-back Zoom meetings, right? Yes, those things are exhausting for a reason. There has to be this flow of exertion and recovery. So look for ways that you can incorporate that into your calendar. And as we get into the Q&A part, I'd be happy to unpack that even further. So what I want to do is I've just planted a few seeds with the time we have. I want to give you some time to think. Given the material that we've been able to cover in our time together, what are some of the key ideas that you're picking up? And take a moment to think about how might you be able to apply those. Now, before we stop today, I am going to challenge you to commit to some form of action based on the information you've received today. But before we do that, let's take some time for some Q&A. If you have specific questions, things we weren't able to touch on that you really want to dig into, please type those.
Stan, we have people not typing questions yet, but some things that they're going to be doing moving forward, you know, scheduling break times on their calendar for lunch, offering phone calls over Zoom to give people screen breaks, pit stop Wednesdays where they don't schedule meetings that morning so people have time to work. Here's a question. How can we help our kids when they seem to burn out as well?
Yeah. So it's funny you mentioned that. When I first started working on this burnout model and with coaching with it, it was actually in a conversation with my daughter, who's a high school senior, and just was saying, Dad, I'm so burned out, you know, kind of some of that senioritis stuff. One of the things we did that helped her is just realize, was this really burnout or worn out? And once she was clear, oh, this is really about just being tired, then she was able to, she actually did some of the things we've talked about. She, you know, she looked at her calendar. Of course, she's a high school senior. But I would suggest one, and depending on the age of your kids, to look at what are the things that they're expressing that make you think this is burnout. Start with, is it burnout or worn out? Because if it's worn out, then really either way, rest is going to be beneficial, but it's especially significant if it's worn out. I also say this could be an opportunity to really get to know and connect with your children on a different level. Remember that disconnect from a sense of purpose, passion, that's one of the places where we start to see some of the burnout things. So I think it's a great opportunity to find out, okay, what's really important to your child right now? And if it's something that you can make some adjustments to help make sure that's happening, go for it. And I'm a big believer in kind of a systems theory that all this stuff's kind of tied together. I'm thinking even in terms of earlier when we were talking about exercise and things of that nature. Had a conversation with a client last week. She had this sense of, okay, exercise had to be at least 30 minutes, and heart rate had to get to a certain level, and it needed to include both cardio and strength training, and just all these kind of success metrics on this thing. As we began to unpack it, the individual realized, wow, really right now she just needs to be able to move, because again, these back-to-back meetings and things like that, and her kids were really wanting some more time with her. So here was this opportunity basically to go outside, and they had some areas where they could walk outside together. So there was an opportunity to make this small shift that helped her reconnect with her kids. It helped her meet some of her goals on her own burnout and exercise issues and things of that nature.
Thank you, Stan. We've got a few more questions in the chat. Someone was asking, how does one stop the rumination?
Oh, friend. Yeah, it's hard. It is so hard. So the Center for Creative Leadership is where I'm getting some of the research on this. I would encourage you to do a Google search and you can get a little more detail on this. Center for Creative Leadership, reflection versus rumination. But the first thing you need to do is wake up out of the rumination. And the way you do that actually is through grounding exercises like the one that we did at the beginning of our time together. Essentially, that rumination, you might just call it getting stuck in your head. And so whatever you can do to reconnect with physical reality, that helps. It may be that if you're in your home and you're not able to get out, right? And because of that, there's all this rumination going on. Take a moment and ask yourself, okay, how many red items can I find in my home, right? So that gets you out of just this loop here, reconnects you to your environment, looking for things. Any kind of physical sensation that you can reconnect to will be helpful. Try an exercise of, okay, just sit quietly. and see what you can hear. What is the sound that you hear that's the furthest away? What's the sound that you hear that's nearest to you? Exercises like that. I would highly recommend a book called Positive Intelligence by Shirzad Shamin. He has a number of exercises. He calls them PQ reps that will help break out of rumination.
Thank you. And then combining two questions here. One is asking, what suggestions do you have to help the board of directors understand burnout? And I think that works nicely also with when is it time to suggest changes from an organizational standpoint to address widespread burnout issues?
Yes. There are assessments that can be used in the workplace to sort of pinpoint where the specific gaps or challenges are related to burnout. I'm thinking of the AWS, Areas of Work-Life Survey. Working, and I don't know that your particular board, I do know in general boards like data. And so the AWS is a verified survey that you could use either for yourself as a leader or for your organization. And you can find specific points where change would be beneficial. The AWS also provides some recommendations. So that could give you some talking points there. I'd be glad to continue that conversation offline because that's a lot more nuanced.
And then I think let's see if this is our final question. As a leader, I feel guilty when I'm not working because there's to do. How do you move away from the guilt so you can really enjoy and recover in the downtime? Yeah.
So repeat after me. Self-care is not selfish. It really is that change in mindset to remind yourself, here's the way I want to show up in the world. And in order to do that, I'm going to take a moment to do this other thing for a greater good. That has helped me at least. Anything else?
Nothing in the chat right now.
Okay, well, that's good because we've only got about 5 minutes left. So I want to encourage everyone to just post for us. What were those ideas that were most relevant for you? And how can you apply them in the week ahead?
We've got calendar checking.
That's one of my personal go-tos. As I get overwhelmed, I come start there. And inevitably I'll find that it's all exertion, no recovery in there.
Yeah, we have a lot of people saying to remember that self-care is not selfish. Of breaking down worn-out versus burnout, validating what I am doing, carve out calendar time for calendar review time. Helpful.
Yeah, that calendar review could be its own self-care exercise. That's great.
Someone said it will still be there tomorrow, so stop already and grab a beer. IDing burnout versus wornout and call them out early, take more breaks, no back-to-back meetings, sharing this and communicating to the boss about implementing better practices for a safe workspace, sharing with family, try to stop or wake up from rumination, more calendar time for self-care. Dead men can't work, rest.
A lot of truth in that. I do want to make everyone also aware that at my website, coachingforinfluence.com, if you'll go to the blog section, at the top of that is a form where you can download a PDF called Leadership Burnout in the Workplace. And that PDF will give more details and more suggestions of some of the things that we've talked about today.
Great. Well, I think that just about nearly concludes the time that we have together. Stan, thank you so much for joining us today and for speaking about burnout versus worn out and giving us some helpful tips for dealing with this. I think everyone can resonate with applying more self-care. And I would like to give a plug for Stan as well, that he is a leadership coach. So if you do want to dive deeper into anything with him, go ahead and reach out to him, contact him. He is amazing to work with. I've done one-on-one sessions with him before, and it's just always really eye-opening. So thank you, Stan. And in addition to that, we would love it if you all would fill out our end of program survey. This is our first alumni event and an open event that we're doing this year. So we would love your feedback. And once you fill out that survey, you'll have access to Stan's PowerPoint as well. So please do that. And if you're interested in any SCLN programming, feel free to reach out to Jessica, myself, Erin, or Colleen. And yeah, we thank you so much for being here. Hope you all have a lovely rest of your day, and don't forget some self-care in your day today. Thank you, guys. No, there was no sign-in sheet. Someone who was asking.
Lindsay, did you talk about the slides?
Yes.